thought I would try to have a provocative topic. Because we've all been to so many different conferences. We've heard many of the similar stories, taking back some of the similar lessons and trying to apply them inside our companies. But what are we going to do in order to truly show value back to the corporation, to the shareholders? So my name is Scott Armanini. I've been in the innovation business, I guess, without knowing it, for the better part of 30 years. As Simon was mentioning just a moment ago, trying to do all sorts of things within the structure of a corporation, frequently running upstream into some pretty significant headwaters, where the corporation just wasn't willing, or more importantly, probably wasn't able to see the opportunities before them because they were so focused on executing their existing business model. So I chose this topic because it embodies several aspects of what we as entrepreneurs, I believe, need to do. How do you feel about this? I want to get some feedback from the audience, please. How do you feel about this, the idea of an unfair advantage? Are you comfortable with it? Just by show of hands. Are you? How many are more comfortable with the idea of a competitive advantage rather than an unfair advantage? It kind of goes to the idea of fair play, and that we're not going to try to do anything unethical. But what we see in the boardroom and what we see in the C-suite is that the companies, the organizations, want to use all of their assets in order to try to make a measurable difference in the world. The executives talk about using the company's unfair advantage. As entrepreneurs, we want to compete fairly and effectively. We want to use a competitive advantage. And so I want us to think about employing all of the assets that we have at our disposal. Now, how about making a measurable difference? What are we measuring? As entrepreneurs, how are we measuring success? And difference. What are we doing that's truly different? What are we doing in order to try to create a new market, a new product, a new service, a new business model? And then finally, creating a billion-dollar business. Is it possible as an entrepreneur to create a billion-dollar business? Yes? No? Or don't know? Have any of us in the room created billion-dollar businesses? One hand. I would argue, in a gentle way, that it is as challenging to create a billion-dollar business as it is a $10 billion business. I would say that you're going to put about as much effort into trying to build that $10 billion business, or $10 million business, as you would a billion-dollar business. The only real difference, at least that I've experienced, is vision, and having the courage to execute on that vision. Would you rather be the lead runner in this race, or would you rather be at the starting line? Think about this. I mean, clearly all of us would want to be the lead runner here because that's going to get us to the finish line faster. But there's a huge difference between what CEOs are expecting from their innovation programs and the results that we as entrepreneurs and intrapreneurs are delivering. And I have to ask, why do we suppose that is? Why do we suppose that there's such a disconnect here? I mean, 80% of CEOs surveyed will say that they are looking to their entrepreneurship teams for game-changing innovations, truly transformative game-changing innovations. And fewer than 20% of these same executives will say that they're actually seeing that from their teams. Why? Why is that? Do we not have enough resources? Do we need more people? Do we need more money? Do we need larger facilities? Do we need more time? Why do you suppose that is? So we ask ourselves, why are we here? I love this event. I was so happy when Hans asked me to come share some thoughts because I'd heard such marvelous feedback about the Intrapreneurship Conference in Europe. And I'm absolutely ecstatic that it's here in the United States for the first time. Because we are practitioners. We are people who actually have to make the Intrapreneurship program work. And so I'm very hopeful that we will be able to learn some lessons from each other and help each other and try to reset this imbalance between CEO expectations and what we are delivering in terms of results, between building a $10 million business or a $1 billion business, having the courage to go for that. So one of the challenges that we have is that, and I'd like to just go ahead and say, if you recognize the movie, go ahead and shout it out. But one of the challenges is, one of my favorite movies, is that as entrepreneurs, we're frequently coming up with ideas that we think are great, or more importantly, maybe an executive sponsor thinks are great, and what reality is telling us is actually needed. And I think both Christian and Simon did a great job of trying to come back and get us centered and grounded in the reality. So in this example from the movie Big, Tom Hanks is looking at this idea that all the market research data showed would be a fantastic idea, and he says, I don't get it. I don't get it. What a powerful statement. Where's the evidence to support the fact that children are going to enjoy playing with this toy? What the CEOs want, they want the magic. They want to be able to get excited and have the customers excited about the value that they're bringing to market. It's not about bringing new ideas. It's about bringing the right new idea. So what do you do when you have a chief executive or a sponsor in business who is a prominent figure or a recognized authority in his or her field? They're the arbiter of taste, of fashion, of style. They're the subject matter expert. Their opinion is gospel. As entrepreneurs, though, we're scientists fundamentally. We're grounded in fact and in reality. And so how do we combat the strength, the forces that a leader of this caliber brings to us? How do we combat that? Another favorite movie of mine. Anybody recognize it? How to Lose a Guy in 10 Days. And in this particular scene, what happens? Bullshit. Bullshit. Now, is it malicious or is it good-natured? It's good-natured, of course. I think that if we tried to have a malicious conversation, we wouldn't be successful. We'd find ourselves unemployed very quickly. But when you can, in a humorous way, say, I just don't see it. As Tom Hanks said, I don't get it. Or in this example, when you say, I just can't believe it. It doesn't make sense. It doesn't pencil out. I think then you have an opportunity to change the conversation to, well, what does make sense? Another favorite movie of mine, I'm a Sherlock Holmes, especially a Basil Rathbone buff. He's always looking for the evidence. And when the facts take you to a certain point, no matter what those facts show, that is the truth. And so as entrepreneurs, as scientists, we have to go off in search of that truth and help our executives, whether it's a chief executive or whether it's an executive sponsor, understand the true reality. I'm an amateur roser, I guess would be what you would call it. And when you're trying to grow roses, and I'm not a very good one, but when you're trying to grow roses, one of the concepts that you have is pruning. And I'd suggest that we as entrepreneurs need to think about our jobs in this light as well. We don't suffer from a lack of ideas. I was at a prominent healthcare company recently, and they had nearly 200 digital health ideas. And these were championed by leaders in their respective fields. Another company, also in the healthcare space, was rapidly approaching 2,000 ideas that had been generated within their company. But there was no methodology for weighing the respective merits of the ideas. So how do you decide which one gets funded? How do you decide which ones die? I'd argue that, again in a respectful way, that the real challenge that we have as entrepreneurs is calling bullshit in a polite way, in a humorous way, on the ideas that are not supported by evidence. Now, evidence of what? Evidence of commercial viability at scale. If the data isn't there to show that this is capable of making a measurable difference to the corporation and her shareholders, we shouldn't be doing it. And I'd suggest that we as entrepreneurs have been doing too many things that have been of questionable value. I'm not saying that they are invaluable, but they are less valuable than they could be. And I suspect that that's true because we have been guided by the needs of our sponsors, and our sponsors are very far away from the truth. They're not grounded in reality, as both Christian and Simon spoke of. So what do we need to do? This is the launch readiness scale that was developed by NASA in the 1960s. It's a stage gate process with 9 different steps. And you cannot launch a vehicle into space unless each hurdle has been successfully passed. And I would say that as entrepreneurs, we need a comparable scale to measure the commercial viability of the ideas that we are tasked with evaluating and bringing to market. We call this the investment readiness level. Now, the investment readiness level, it starts with a large body of work at the bottom. Unlike most startups who are going to go off and build a minimum viable product quickly and then iterate and experiment based upon the feedback that they're getting. In a corporation, the model is different. In a corporation where we are trying to do things at scale in order to build these billion-dollar businesses, in a corporation, we need research up front. And that research up front is going to tell us whether or not there is a commercially viable business model here. And if there is not a commercially viable business model, why would we ever begin prototyping? It's a question of doing more with less. Now, I'm going to put out a challenge to us mentally. I'm going to ask us to go into the future by a year. Economists are telling us that we're going to have a global recession next year. If that happens, if our budgets are slashed dramatically in our intrapreneurship program or within our research and development program, what ideas are we going to kill? Why not kill them now? Why not use the resources that we've recovered and invest them in exploring for those business models that are going to truly make a difference by using our unfair advantage. Now, the unfair advantage is different than a competitive advantage in the sense that it combines the various assets within the corporation. It's not only about the brand at the center, it has to do with all of the resources at our disposal. And when you leverage all of the resources at your disposal, you have the opportunity for what's called rapid value creation. I won't take the time to read this in detail. The essential principles here are that you're going to do the research up front, you're going to find the evidence of commercial viability, and then and only then are you going to begin the experimentation of taking it to a prototype that you can then bring to customers. I've been enamored with the idea of innovation as science. And unlike the physician who was used in the example that Simon cited, the innovation I don't believe is very artful. I think it's fact-based. I think it's evidence-based. And I believe that we can look at innovation as an industrial process. When you have a factory, think about the factories if you're that type of business. You choose the highest quality inputs in order to create the highest quality output. And I would say that ideation as entrepreneurs should be no different. We should only be working on those highest quality inputs, supported by evidence of commercial viability. And if we can do that, then we have an opportunity to create a repeatable, scalable process that can be a predictor of regular successful results. And that's making the measurable difference to the company. So how do we do this? We have to develop the hypothesis that we're going to test. We have to gather the evidence that's going to support or refute the hypothesis for the business model. And then we're going to revise it or pivot it as appropriate. This is all familiar. This is the lean launchpad methodology, but applied to a corporate setting. A corporate setting which is accustomed to creating industrial processes and then bringing those processes to market at scale. I want to ask us a question. How regularly do we meet with the Chief Executive Officer? Is it on a quarterly basis? Okay. Are there any of us who don't meet with the Chief Executive Officer at all? I'd say that's the majority of us, right? Because their time is precious. But I would say that the fact that they're not spending time with us as the practitioners is a mistake. And I'd say that we would be very valuable to them, perhaps more so than people who are operating lines of business today, if we can bring them evidence of what that next great business model, that next great business opportunity is going to be. I would say that we should be meeting with the chief executive at least every 6 months, hopefully on a quarterly basis. How often are we meeting with the head of human resources? The folks who not only are responsible for bringing new employees in, but developing the leadership and development programs for them. Quarterly? Every 6 months? Ever? See, I think as entrepreneurs, and I think as corporate entrepreneurs, we have another customer that we haven't been addressing. And that's the leadership and development organization. I think it's incumbent upon us, if we're going to truly make a measurable difference in the company's success, to translate our knowledge and our skills and our experiences and to bring them into the leadership and development organization so they can begin to be propagated across the organization. I think that's how we show demonstrable value, so that others can learn the art of commercialization. Not invention, commercialization. Not research, but the development piece. So when you have strong leaders, authorities, subject matter experts, where you have sponsors who have a particular vision of the way the world is, and they're inflexible, the way that we adjust their thinking is by showing them the evidence that the world is different than the way they believe it is. So I'm going to cite a couple examples here for folks that we've worked with. The first will be a household name, remain nameless, of a major financial services company based here in New York, Wall Street. We began working with this company, and the executive was very skeptical, thought that this was a waste of time to think about commercial viability, because in this instance, he is the world's authority on this particular topic. His team, however, felt differently. They felt that things were changing, but they had no evidence in order to bring to the executive to say, here's why we need to think about doing this differently. We'll fast forward 2 months. The team gathers the evidence, presents it to the executive, who then says, "My God, the world has changed and I did not know it." Now, there's 2 reactions that the executive could have had. One is to become very defensive, and one is to become acceptant. In this instance, the latter happened. The reaction, not only did this save him more than $2 million, it saved an amazing amount of time that can be redirected in other areas. But the real catch that came out of this was the feeling of liberation. The fact that the executive could now be seen to be vulnerable, and vulnerability being a positive trait. He could now be authentic. He could rely upon his team to gather evidence that would allow him then to truly be an authentic leader, as opposed to just somebody with years of experience in the field. Another example I'll cite will be from a very famous physician who had invented a new way of helping people who had a certain medical condition. The evidence showed that there was not a demonstrable increase or improvement in the outcome for patients. Not only that, insurance companies would not reimburse for it. So instead, he pivoted and applied this to a surgical procedure which was having poor outcomes, post-operative infections. The result is a dramatic improvement in patient quality of life, a lessening of repeat instances for surgical procedures, and most importantly, reimbursability from the standpoint of insurance companies. His feedback was, "You have just saved me more than 2 years of my life, solving the wrong problem." You see, as entrepreneurs, we can always go out and get more resources, whether it's facility space or hire more staff or get additional budget. But there's one thing we can never get back, and that's time. And that's the most precious commodity we have. So in closing, I'd just like to draw back to some concepts that have been going around for the last 100 years. About 100 years ago, IBM taught us to think. 30 years ago, in 1984, Apple taught us to think differently. And as entrepreneurs, I challenge us today to think in a more modern way, to think scientifically of where the evidence leads us, and use that as the basis to think about commercialization of your ideas at scale. And if we do this as entrepreneurs, I am confident that we will not only show demonstrable value back to our executives, but we will truly be able to create those billion-dollar businesses in short order. Thank you.